Hi everybody. Tonight, let's take a slow step into the quiet lacquered corridors of time, back to feudal Japan. In this 24-part story, we'll gently follow the life of a concubine living within the gilded cage of a daimyo's residence. This isn't a tale of war or political intrigue, but of silk-screened rooms, fragrant tea, whispered conversations, and the delicate rituals that shaped a woman's life from dawn until moonrise. Every word is chosen to soothe, every detail here to help you drift into a state of calm curiosity. So, if you're ready, close your eyes, relax your shoulders, and come along with me into the world of scented scrolls, silent courtyards, and the inner chambers of a woman seldom seen, but never forgotten. The sky had not yet begun to lighten when Hana stirred in her futon. A faint breath of breeze slid through the rice paper screens. The silence of the room remained undisturbed, except for the gentle swish of her silken covers. Hana's eyes fluttered open, her body still wrapped in the gentle weight of sleep. The scent of sandalwood lingered in the air. Her room had been perfumed the night before. She stayed still for a moment, watching the bamboo shadows move on the wall. Today, like all days, would begin in quiet obedience. Hana was the youngest concubine of Lord Takeda's household. Just 17 years old, chosen from a village known for women with delicate features and graceful movement. Her life had changed from rice paddies and washing stones to silks and sweet persimmons in a matter of months. But here, in this residence with high walls and guarded gates, the world outside was a dream long gone. A gentle knock 3 times on her screen door told her that Sayo had arrived. Sayo, her attendant, older by nearly a decade, slipped in like mist. Her face was calm and careful, hands folded neatly in front of her. "Oh, hayo gozaimasu Hana-sama," she whispered. Hana sat up slowly, her long black hair tumbling over her shoulders. Sayo moved to her side and began brushing it out in even strokes, each motion smooth and measured. Hana didn't speak. Words before sunrise were considered unlucky. When her hair was braided in a single looped plait, they moved together to the wash basin. The water was cold, drawn from the courtyard well before first light. Sayo dipped a cloth and wrung it out, offering it to Hana. She dabbed her face gently, then her neck, then the backs of her hands. Cleanliness was not just custom, it was a quiet kind of prayer. Dressing followed. Today was a second-day moon, an omen of softness, so she was given a pale blue kimono with white cranes stitched along the hem. It smelled of cedar and summer wind. The obi was a muted gold, tied just so, not too tight, not too proud. Once dressed, she was led barefoot through the corridor to the inner gardens. The stones beneath her soles were cool, polished smooth by decades of footsteps just like hers. In the garden, the koi were already stirring in the pond. A single lotus floated open, dew still clinging to its petals. This was Hana's time to breathe. Concubines in Lord Takeda's house were not prisoners, but they were not free either. They lived within invisible rules, to be pleasing but not proud, gentle but not idle, attentive but never eager. Silence was praised more than conversation, gracefulness more than opinion. In the garden, Hana recited her morning poem under her breath. The moon retires, dew weeps from lotus leaves, morning waits in silk. She had written it herself 2 weeks ago during the monsoon. When the bell sounded from the central chamber, she turned. It was time for morning greetings. The concubines gathered in order of seniority, from eldest to youngest. Hana was always last. She took her place, kneeling perfectly, back straight, eyes lowered. Lady Akiko, the first concubine, entered like a crane gliding across a still lake. Her hair was oiled and pinned with jade combs, and her eyes betrayed nothing. She had been with the Lord for 9 years. Hana sometimes dreamed of being like her, though she wasn't sure whether that was a dream of admiration or survival. They bowed together. The sound of silk whispering over tatami mats was the only noise in the room. After greetings, the day began in earnest. Hana was assigned to the tea room that morning, assisting in preparations for a poetry visit from a traveling monk. She would not participate, only prepare, arranging cups, trimming incense, ensuring the tatami were swept of any specks of dust. Every movement was art. The way she placed a teacup, turned it just so, bowed from the waist as she set it down. It was all part of the unspoken performance of womanhood in these halls. Around mid-morning, a tray of rice gruel, pickled plum, and tea was brought to her room. She ate in silence. No one ate together. Meals were meditative, a reminder of simplicity and modesty. Even the gruel had a beauty to it, dotted with sesame seeds, steam curling upward like a dancer's fingers. In the afternoon, Hana was permitted time in the literary room. This was her favorite part of the day. A high-ceilinged chamber filled with scrolls, paintings, and a faint smell of aged paper. She was allowed to copy verses from the court poets, Izumi Shikibu, Murasaki Shikibu, Ono no Komachi. Their words, centuries old, still felt like they moved in her fingertips. She loved Komachi most of all. In this world, love has no color, yet how deeply my body is stained by yours. Hana copied it with care, the brush in her hand flowing like water. She didn't think of Lord Takeda. She thought of something more distant, a face she hadn't seen yet, someone who would hear her thoughts without her speaking them aloud. But such ideas were dreams. Here, longing was folded into ritual. Passion was turned into poetry. When the sun began to descend, she returned to her quarters. Her hair was brushed again. Her robe changed to evening hues, deep plum and silver thread. Lanterns were lit outside her chamber. The glow was soft and drowsy. A hush settled over the compound. Tonight, she would not be called. The Lord had gone hunting the day before, and such nights were rare gifts, an evening to herself. She lit a single stick of incense. The smoke curled upward in a spiral. Outside, crickets sang. Lying down on her futon, she listened to the hush of distant rain. The season was changing. Soon the leaves in the courtyard would begin to fall, one by one, like all things that bloom in quiet and vanish in silence. Hana closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come, with all its rituals, its silence, its beauty, and its softness. But for now, the night was hers. The next morning arrived wrapped in mist. A pale hush blanketed the compound as the first thread of light crept into Hana's chamber. Unlike the golden clarity of yesterday's dawn, this one felt distant and gray, like a secret whispered behind a folding screen. Hana blinked slowly, her breath fogging the air for a moment before fading. The scent of plum blossoms drifted from the courtyard, softened by dew. There was no knock this time. Sayo entered in silence as always, but today her movements were slower, more careful, like she was trying not to disturb something fragile. Perhaps she sensed it too, the weight in the air. Or perhaps she had received word before Hana ever opened her eyes. A summons had come. Lord Takeda would see her tonight. Hana didn't flinch at the news, but something stirred in her chest. Not fear exactly, not even excitement. It was a kind of stillness, like the way a pond holds its breath before a crane lands. Sayo began the morning routine. Each step, each motion felt sharper today, edged with purpose. The brushing of hair, the cold cloth against her skin, the selection of garments, it all unfolded with an unspoken reverence. The kimono chosen was pale lilac, embroidered with a scattering of blossoms so delicate they seemed to fall with her every step, an omen of beauty that fades. Breakfast was light, a wedge of persimmon, 3 slices of lotus root, a cup of barley tea. Hana ate slowly, her gaze fixed on the shifting shadows cast by the paper screen. Outside, the koi barely moved, clustered near the stones as if waiting. She was not expected to work today. That, too, was part of the ritual. A concubine called to the Lord was to rest, to reflect, to be made calm and serene, like a painting before it's hung. So Hana sat in the inner garden, beneath the spreading limbs of a plum tree. Its branches were thick with buds, some just beginning to open. She rested her hands in her lap, folded like petals. The air was cool and carried the scent of earth, moss, and faint smoke. She listened to the drip of water from a nearby bamboo pipe. Time passed not in hours, but in the way the light changed. Sayo returned mid-morning with a small scroll. Inside it was a verse written by the Lord's personal calligrapher. These messages were never direct, only poetry, only implication. The moon meets the still water. No ripple, no word, yet everything is known. Hana read it once, twice, and tucked it away. The rest of the day unfolded like a dream. She bathed in petals and warm water, her skin dusted with rice powder scented faintly with yuzu. Her nails were polished with crushed camellia, her eyebrows darkened with charcoal ash. She was not made up like the wives of the court, no paints or powders to mask, but presented as she was, a living poem of restraint and delicacy. By sunset, her room had been transformed. Fresh scrolls with painted plum blossoms were hung on the walls. A lacquered table set with seasonal fruits. The futon had been removed. A single cushion was placed at the center of the tatami, waiting. When Sayo returned with the final garment, her eyes lingered on Hana for a moment longer than usual. It was a wordless moment, one of quiet protection. The final robe was deeper than the others, a dusky violet that shimmered like twilight. The obi, black with silver threads, wrapped firm around her waist like a quiet promise. As the sky darkened, a page arrived with a lantern. He bowed, eyes averted. It was time. Hana followed him through the corridors, her footsteps silent against the floor. The path was lined with flickering lanterns, their light trembling in the breeze. The deeper they walked into the compound, the quieter everything became. They arrived at the autumn chamber, a room rarely used. It was named for its view. Shoji panels opened onto a courtyard filled with maple trees. Even in the dim, one could make out the red leaves scattered like spilled ink across the stones. The door slid open. Lord Takeda sat within. He was not old, but not young. His hair was dark with streaks of silver at the temples. His robes were simple, but the way he wore them betrayed rank. Power, even when quiet, does not hide easily. He looked at her, not appraising, not predatory, simply watching. She bowed deeply, her forehead brushed the mat. When she sat across from him, he poured the tea himself. Not a word was spoken for several minutes. The sound of water, the tap of porcelain, the rustle of trees outside. Then softly he asked, "Do you dream of home?" Hana's eyes lifted. A question unexpected, not part of the rehearsed scripts the concubines practiced. She let the silence stretch a little. Then quietly, sometimes in the hour before dawn. Takeda sipped his tea. I remember that hour well. And there it was, the first thread between them. They did not speak of love. That word was not meant for these chambers. They spoke instead of poetry, of dreams, of the sound plum trees make when the wind is warm. He asked if she liked music. She told him of the flute her brother once played. He asked if she wrote poems. She recited one, carefully but without trembling. In stillness you came like snow that melts without touching the earth. He nodded. And the rest of the evening passed not in fever, but in quiet rhythm, like waves lapping against the shore of something almost forgotten. When she returned to her room later that night, alone, the incense had burned down to a curl of ash. Sayo was waiting. She did not ask what had passed. Hana removed the robe carefully and folded it herself. She lay in her bed, not touching the silken sheets, but staring at the paper screen. And for the first time, she wondered if she had changed. Not because of touch, not because of words, but because something inside her had been seen and had not been dismissed. And in the world she lived in, that alone was enough to turn the tide of a quiet heart. The following morning drifted in with golden light. A hush, warm and expectant, blanketed the estate. The shadows of maple leaves fluttered against the papered walls, and in the stillness of her room, Hana stirred. There was no urgency in her limbs, no sharp edge to her breath, only a soft lingering, like the fading echo of a temple bell. She was already awake when Sayo entered, though she pretended not to be. She kept her eyes closed for a few more heartbeats, savoring the silence before routine began again. Sayo's movements were quieter than usual. She stepped lightly, brushed Hana's hair with more gentleness than ritual demanded. She didn't speak until Hana opened her eyes and sat up, her dark braid trailing over her shoulder like ink across parchment. "You are calm this morning," Sayo whispered. Hana didn't answer immediately. She reached for the edge of the futon, grounding herself in the present moment. Then she looked at her attendant and smiled, faintly. "I slept without dreaming," she replied. Sayo gave a slight nod, understanding that such sleep, in their world, was a rare kind of peace. After washing, Hana dressed in pale tones, an ivory kimono with drifting patterns of cloud-gray cranes. She chose it herself, something quiet, something that matched her mood. The morning sun caught the soft texture of the silk, casting a glow around her that felt almost unearthly. As she stepped out into the corridor, the world seemed quieter. Servants bowed in silence. Even the birds in the trees sang more softly. Something had shifted, and not just within her. Word had spread. Though no one said it aloud, Hana could feel it, eyes lingering a fraction longer as she passed, hushed voices slipping behind paper screens. In the tightly wound world of the daimyo's residence, nothing remained secret for long. She had been called, and she had returned. Her place in the house had changed. It wasn't a rise in rank that required the Lord's public declaration, but it was something more subtle and in many ways more powerful. A ripple had begun, and ripples in this place became tides. Her duties for the day resumed, but they were different now. She was no longer sweeping corridors or preparing scrolls for others. Instead, she was summoned to the floral chamber to assist Lady Akiko in selecting arrangements for the guest hall. It was unusual. Lady Akiko, poised and distant, rarely engaged with the younger women. She ruled her domain like a carved statue, beautiful, unyielding, untouchable. And yet this morning, she stood waiting by the window, a basket of plum blossoms in her arms, her eyes fixed on the distant pond. Hana bowed. "You summoned me, Lady Akiko." A pause. Then, "Yes." The elder concubine didn't look at her immediately. She stepped to the flower stand and began arranging the blossoms in a black ceramic vase. "You favor simplicity," she said, selecting a branch and trimming it with a single, elegant snip. Hana watched her carefully, not answering too quickly. "Simplicity holds the space for meaning," she said quietly. Akiko's eyes flicked to her, then returned to the flowers. "Words like that," she murmured, "make you memorable." The silence that followed was not unfriendly. It was a kind of recognition, a weighing of presence, not competition. They arranged flowers in silence for a time. Petal by petal, branch by branch, the vase slowly became a whisper of spring. When they were done, Lady Akiko stepped back and examined their work. "It will please him," she said. "Not the Lord, not Takeda-sama, just him." That was the moment Hana understood. Lady Akiko was not offering approval, nor was she giving a warning. She was acknowledging something ancient and unspoken between women who lived within the same fragile web. They were not enemies, but they were never entirely free of one another either. That afternoon, Hana returned to the literary room. She had not expected to be permitted there again so soon. Perhaps it was a reward. Perhaps it was meant to keep her calm, contained, inwardly focused. The scrolls had been changed. A new poem adorned the wall. The candle flickers, not for fear of wind, but for the weight of memory. She traced the characters with her gaze, letting the rhythm settle over her like rain on a pond. She chose a blank scroll, ground her inkstone, and began to write, but her mind wandered. Not to the Lord, not exactly, but to the space they had shared, the stillness between them, the way he had asked about her dreams without expecting a performance in return, and the way he had listened. She wondered if he would call for her again, or if that single night would be the extent of their crossing. Some concubines were favored only once. Others became whispers on his pillow for months, then years. But Hana did not hunger for certainty. She had grown up with the seasons, with the ebb and flow of rice and rain. She knew how to wait. The evening fell with the scent of burning cypress. The corridors shimmered with amber light as the lanterns were lit one by one. Hana returned to her room, where a new robe had been laid out for her, soft blue, threaded with gold. No message, no summons. She changed anyway and sat by the open window, legs tucked beneath her, the robe pooling like a river around her. The sky was painted in soft lavender and ash. She did not write tonight. She simply watched. The koi moved beneath the surface of the pond, their bodies slow and languid. A cicada clicked once, then fell silent. A breeze lifted the edge of the screen, and in that quiet, a thought came to her. Not urgent, not sad, just clear. She was no longer invisible. Whatever came next, whether it be days of silence or another summons in the night, her name had begun to echo in places it had never reached before. And in the world she now lived in, that echo could change everything. The dawn of the fourth day crept in with golden fingertips brushing the edges of the sky. Hana awoke not to footsteps or whispers, but to the rustling of the trees in the courtyard beyond her shuttered screens. The world outside breathed gently, and within her chamber, stillness hung like silk. No message had arrived, no summons, no new duties were posted outside her door. And yet the day felt unlike the others. She rose slowly. Sayo arrived moments later, her arms filled with a folded robe, the color of persimmon in early autumn. There was no greeting. There didn't need to be. The air between them, filled with quiet understanding, was greeting enough. Bathing was brief this morning. A small basin of warm water, fragrant with crushed chrysanthemum. Hana washed her hands and face with soft strokes, as if afraid to break the delicate spell that wrapped around her since that night in the autumn chamber. As Sayo combed her hair, Hana caught her own reflection in the lacquered mirror. There she was, the same eyes, the same mouth, the same slope of cheek, but the gaze that met her was different, clearer, as if a curtain had been drawn back inside her, revealing something previously veiled even to herself. After dressing, she took a walk through the plum garden. No one stopped her, no one followed. Perhaps they were watching from behind their screens, but no presence made itself known. The garden was mostly empty this early. Only the gentle sweep of the gardener's broom could be heard at the far end of the path. Hana moved slowly, her bare feet pressing into the smooth stones, her sleeves trailing like river mist. She paused beside the koi pond and let her thoughts drift. She had been told once, by an old woman in her village, that a woman's fate was written in the rhythm of her steps. Not in where she walked, but in how. Graceful steps were believed to please the gods. Steady steps brought fortune, and hesitant ones, sorrow. So Hana had trained her feet to move with grace. But now she wondered if she had trained her heart to move the same way, to glide, to conceal, to drift. What would happen, she wondered, if her heart ever dared to step boldly? Later that morning, a visiting poet was announced. He was not young. His beard was streaked with gray, and his fingers bore the ink stains of long hours hunched over scrolls. He was known throughout the province for his ability to evoke silence, not with absence, but with reverence. And today, Lord Takeda had invited him to compose verses within the estate. It was an honor and a rare event. The concubines were not invited to speak with him, only to observe from behind a screen in the orchid room where a tea ceremony would accompany the reading of his latest poems. Hana took her place among the others, knees folded, hands in her lap, eyes lowered. She did not expect to be noticed, and yet as the poet entered and made his way toward the Lord's platform, his gaze flicked once, briefly, toward the far screen. A glance, no more than a breath, and then gone. The room filled with the scent of roasted tea leaves. Steam curled from the lip of the kettle. Cups clinked gently, silence settled like velvet, and then the poet began to read. A single plum blossom, half open, half lost to the wind, before it ever knew spring. The words were like mist, sliding into the folds of the room, wrapping around with invisible threads. Hana sat still, but something inside her unfurled. Another poem followed, and another, each one shorter than the last, each one cutting deeper, not with pain, but with recognition. These were not court poems, not verses written for lords or generals. These were for those who knew longing, who carried silence like a lantern through narrow, unseen places. And suddenly, she knew why she had been allowed to come. She was not here to be seen. She was here to see. When the readings ended, the guests departed quietly, like smoke retreating into air. The concubines remained kneeling until all footsteps faded. Then Lady Akiko rose. She did not speak to Hana directly, but as she passed, her sleeve brushed lightly against Hana's. Not an accident, a message. One she couldn't decipher, but felt deeply all the same. That evening, no messages came. But Sayo lingered in her chamber longer than usual, as if waiting for something that never arrived. Hana, sensing it too, said nothing. The air between them was filled with questions unspoken. Instead, she opened her scroll case and selected a clean sheet. She ground her ink slowly, letting the rhythm of the stone soothe her. And then, without planning, she wrote, "He read poems, and I saw the shape of my name in the space between the lines." She didn't read it twice. She folded it carefully and tucked it beneath her pillow. That night, sleep came slowly. The wind had picked up. The bamboo outside creaked softly. Lantern light danced on the walls. Hana lay with her eyes open, tracing the beams of the ceiling with her thoughts. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. Whether it would be silence or summons, cold stares or soft words. But she no longer moved through the world as one unnoticed. Even if her role remained undefined, even if her name was still spoken in whispers, she had begun to take root in this place. And like the poet's verse, she had learned the power of what is not said, but deeply felt. The morning of the 5th day arrived, draped in a curtain of silver fog. It slipped through the branches of the plum trees, wrapped around the corners of tiled rooftops, and hovered just above the courtyard stones like a spirit reluctant to leave. Hana sat at her window long before the first bell rang, her knees tucked beneath her, a thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The estate was hushed in a deeper way today. Not merely quiet, but inward, contemplative, a stillness that felt as though the house itself were holding its breath. Sayo entered bearing a tray of warm water and cloths. Her steps were measured, more thoughtful than usual. She did not speak. The two women moved together through the rhythm of the morning, washing, brushing, dressing, as though in prayer. Hana chose a robe of dusky gray with patterns of bamboo stitched in silver thread. It suited the mist. Outside her door, a folded note had been placed carefully beneath a stone. That alone was unusual. Concubines did not receive private messages unless permitted by the house mistress or the lord himself. Sayo picked it up, her expression unreadable, and handed it to Hana without a word. The calligraphy was elegant, formal, but the content was brief. There is beauty in the still leaf that waits to fall. No name, no seal, but Hana knew. It was him. She pressed the paper between her palms and closed her eyes for a moment. Not to analyze, not to dream, but simply to feel the weight of being remembered. The rest of the morning moved with the same softness. Hana was summoned not for chores or garden duties, but to assist in the incense preparation for the meditation room. It was a quiet task, measuring, blending, shaping, an art of memory and scent. The older servant who supervised the process was gentle with her. She showed Hana how to grind the sandalwood, how to layer the hint of clove and aloes wood so that it lingered on the edges of thought but never overwhelmed. "This is not to please the nose," the woman said, not looking up. "It is to awaken the past." Hana nodded, pressing the shaped incense into the mold with delicate fingers. When she was finished, she was permitted time in the sealed garden, a small but enclosed courtyard reserved only for those whom the Lord had personally favored. It was considered a place of reflection, used rarely and never for display. Sayo led her there in silence. The moment the gate slid open, a different world emerged. Here, the air smelled of pine and river stones. A single maple tree arched over the courtyard, its leaves deepening into crimson. A bench of smooth granite stood at the far edge, half covered in fallen leaves. Hana stepped inside alone. No one accompanied her, not even Sayo. The quiet was profound, like a forgotten temple. She sat on the bench and placed her hands in her lap. Her gaze wandered upward, following the branches as they reached toward the sky. She remembered the note again. There is beauty in the still leaf that waits to fall. Was that what he saw in her? A stillness? A waiting? Or had he seen something else? The hours passed uncounted. No duties called her, no voices summoned. Even the breeze that stirred the leaves did so with care. When she returned to her quarters, dusk had begun to stretch its fingers across the walls. A fresh robe had been laid out on her mat, midnight blue, with wave patterns that shimmered like moonlight over water. Sayo began the preparations without being asked. Hana stood, arms outstretched as the layers were wrapped around her. There was no message, no page, but they both knew it would be tonight. When the lantern came, flickering with amber light, Hana followed it through the halls with the same quiet breath she had practiced since she arrived. But something inside her now walked beside her, something neither small nor trembling. The chamber was the same as before, the autumn room, the maple trees beyond the screen shedding their final leaves in the dusk. A brazier warmed the air, scented with the incense she had helped prepare just hours before. He was already there. Lord Takeda sat cross-legged, a scroll open beside him. He looked up as she entered, and again there was no command in his gaze, only invitation. She bowed deeply and took her place. The silence between them was different tonight, not tentative, not filled with waiting. It was shared, as if they had already spoken without words. "I liked your poem," he said finally. His voice was soft, lower than she remembered. She raised her eyes. "I did not send one." "No," he said, "but I read it." She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. The servant saw everything. Every scroll, every paper folded beneath a pillow. "You write with longing," he said. Hana tilted her head. "Longing is the ink we're given." He smiled, not broadly, but with a flicker that softened his face. They drank tea together. No ritual, no servants, only the two of them, facing one another in the slow amber light. He asked about her life before, not in detail, not names or stories, only textures. "What did the river near your home sound like?" "Like bells made of water," she said. He nodded. "I remember such rivers." She watched him then. Not the Lord, not the figure of power, but the man who still remembered rivers and poets and how silence could be more intimate than touch. When she finally spoke again, it was barely more than a breath. Why me? He looked at her for a long moment, then said, because you do not feel the silence, you tend it. And in that moment, Hana felt something shift, not just between them, but within her. She had come to this place as a girl of chosen grace, a name on a scroll, a petal in a vase. But now in the presence of someone who saw not her beauty, but her stillness, her restraint, her presence, she felt the beginning of something deeper. Not power, but meaning. When she returned to her room that night, the fog had lifted. The stars blinked quietly above the rooftops. Sayo helped her undress in silence, then left with a bow. Hana lay on her futon, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint breath of wind in the trees. There would be more nights, perhaps many. But this one, she knew, was the first where she had been seen not as ornament, but as mirror. And in that reflection, a life she had not dared to imagine was beginning to take form. The sixth day arrived with the muted hush of falling rain. Soft and persistent, it tapped against the paper walls like a quiet visitor too polite to demand entry. The scent of wet earth rose gently from the garden stones, mingling with the smell of cedar beams and faint traces of yesterday's incense. Hana woke slowly, not with the usual precision, but as though her body had remembered the rhythm of sleep and wanted to linger. The light was dim, filtered through thick gray clouds, and for a moment, the line between dream and waking felt blurred. Sayo entered without a word, her robe already speckled with mist. She set down the washing basin and reached for the folded towels, her expression more distant than usual. Hana sensed the shift but did not ask. They moved through the rituals of the morning as though wading through still water. As her hair was brushed, Hana watched the raindrops roll down the edge of the wooden veranda. Each one fell, not in haste, but with quiet purpose, surrendering to gravity with the grace only nature understands. She was given a robe of soft plum, almost gray in certain light, embroidered with silver-threaded willow branches. Rainwear, not in the practical sense, but in mood, a garment that echoed the softness of the sky. No summons came that morning, no note, no page, no whispered direction from a passing attendant. She was left to her own time, and with it came a peculiar kind of solitude, neither loneliness nor freedom, but something in between, a spaciousness she was unaccustomed to. After a simple breakfast of rice and pickled daikon, Hana wandered into the literary room. The windows there had been left ajar, allowing the scent of rain-soaked garden moss to drift in. The room was empty, save for a scroll left partially unrolled at one end of the table. She paused before it. The calligraphy was precise, old. A poem from the court of Emperor Daigo. I thought to pick the flower, but it was the scent that lingered with me. Hana traced the strokes with her eyes, not her fingers. The rain had a rhythm now, and it filled the room with its soft cadence. She settled by the low table and chose her brush, dipping it into the ink slowly. Today, she would not write about longing or mystery. Today, she would write about the rain. Even the rain asks for nothing, only to fall and disappear unnoticed. She finished the verse, blotted it gently, and placed it on the rack to dry. A voice behind her spoke. That is a poem for no one. Hana turned, startled. It was Lady Akiko. She stood in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the dim light. Her hair was braided high, adorned with ivory combs. She stepped inside with the poise of someone who had once been startled herself, but no longer allowed the world to see it. Forgive me, Hana murmured, rising to bow. Lady Akiko waved a hand. No need. I came only to find a certain scroll. It seems I found something else. Hana remained still. Akiko approached the drying poem and read it silently, then turned her gaze to Hana again. You are beginning to write without waiting to be read. It was not a compliment, nor was it a rebuke. It was a diagnosis. Hana didn't know how to answer, so she only nodded. Akiko stood beside her now, their reflections blurred together in the polished lacquer of the table. The rain changes many things, she said. Paths flood, stones disappear, but it also makes the roots grow deeper. Hana looked at her then, not as a rival, not as a figure to fear, but as a woman who understood the architecture of survival. Akiko's eyes softened. Be careful, Hana. Even the gentlest rain can bring down walls if it falls long enough. She left without another word. That afternoon, the rain deepened into a steady curtain, blurring the edges of the estate. Lanterns were lit early, casting halos of light against the sliding screens. Hana remained indoors, her duty suspended, her presence neither required nor forbidden. Sayo returned with a small parcel, wrapped in silk and bound with a thin thread of gold. Inside, nestled against a fold of tissue, was a comb, simple, carved from sandalwood, no jewels, no lacquer. But along its spine, a single crane had been etched, wings lifted as though mid-flight. There was no note, but there didn't need to be. Hana held it in her hands for a long time, the weight of it, the warmth of the wood, the precision of the carving. It was a gift from him, not for ceremony, not for display, but for her. That night, as the rain eased into a whisper, Hana sat alone in her chamber, the comb resting on her table beside the candle. She didn't use it, not yet, but she kept it close. Outside, the frogs had begun to sing from the mossy corners of the garden. The world smelled of wet leaves and smoke, and somewhere beyond the walls, the Lord, her Lord, was perhaps reading, perhaps thinking of poems, or perhaps remembering the sound of her voice. She didn't know. But tonight, it didn't matter. Because even if she was not summoned, even if no new words passed between them, the comb was enough. It said, I remember. It said, I see you. And in the quiet, Hana allowed herself to believe, for just one night, that being seen, truly seen, was not the same as being claimed. It was gentler, and somehow more dangerous. The seventh day arrived with a tender breeze and soft light filtered through thinning clouds. The rain had passed, leaving behind the hush that always followed, an echoing calm, as though the world were sighing in relief. The courtyard stones glistened in the sun's pale warmth, and tiny droplets clung to the bamboo leaves like beads of glass. Hana rose before the morning bell, awakened not by sound, but by the clarity that comes after dreams dissolve. Her breath was steady, her limbs light. The quiet inside her matched the stillness outside. Sayo entered moments later, her hair still damp at the edges, as though she too had bathed in the freshness of the new day. She greeted Hana with a soft bow, and without words began the morning rituals. Today, Hana chose the comb. She lifted it from the lacquered tray where it had rested all night. The sandalwood was warm to the touch, as though it had absorbed her dreams. She handed it to Sayo with a glance that said, This matters. Sayo's hands were careful, reverent. She drew the comb through Hana's hair slowly, gently, as though each stroke was a verse in an unspoken poem. The carved crane caught the light with every pass, a symbol of grace, of longevity, of flight. After dressing in pale rose silk with soft white lining, Hana moved to the window. The garden beyond her chamber bloomed with new color. Tiny white blossoms had appeared overnight on the plum tree. The koi swam lazily beneath the surface, golden fins flashing like forgotten treasure. Breakfast was served in silence, a triangle of rice wrapped in persimmon leaf, a bowl of miso, and a single candied chestnut. Simple, but beautiful in its restraint. Every detail of the meal seemed to echo the mood of the day. Soft, expectant, unfinished. Then, a message arrived. Unlike before, this one was not a poem, not a whisper of metaphor. It was written in the hand of the house mistress, Lady Fuji. It read only, You are to be trained in the art of scent. Hana stared at the words for a long moment. This was not a common assignment. The art of scent was a highly guarded tradition, reserved for those closest to the Lord or destined to serve in ceremonial chambers where the senses held dominion over words. It was a form of communication, of persuasion, even of memory. Few women were ever trained in it. Fewer still mastered it. Sayo's eyes flickered across the note, but she said nothing. She bowed deeply, turned, and left to prepare Hana's things. When Hana arrived at the scent chamber, it was not what she expected. There were no rows of perfume bottles or trays of petals. The room was nearly bare, a low table, a floor mat, a wooden box sealed with lacquer and mother of pearl, and a single woman seated in the corner, old as winter bark, her hair white and piled atop her head like a cloud that had forgotten to drift away. Sit, the woman said, not unkindly. Hana obeyed. I am Otsuki, the woman continued. I trained the first. I trained the one before her. I may train you. That depends. Hana bowed deeply. I am ready to learn. No, Otsuki said. You are ready to listen. That is different. She reached for the lacquered box and opened it. Inside were 5 small wooden containers, each labeled in delicate calligraphy: agarwood, musk, clove, chrysanthemum. Ambergris. Otsuki removed the lid from the first agar wood and placed a pinch into the tiny iron censer on the table. She lit the charcoal and fanned the smoke gently toward Hana. "Breathe," she said. Hana did. The scent was deep, earthy, resinous, but not overwhelming. It wound through her like silk, rising from memory and sinking into bone. "What do you feel?" Otsuki asked. Hana paused. "A memory," she said, "but I cannot name it." "Good," Otsuki said. "Memory is the doorway. The name is the lock." They continued like that for over an hour. Smoke, breath, questions. No answers were expected, only awareness. Otsuki did not instruct in the usual sense. She evoked, she peeled back, she watched. When the lesson ended, she said only, "Return tomorrow. Do not wear scent. Do not dream of flowers." Hana bowed and left, her head still full of invisible threads of fragrance, like the echo of a song. The 8th day began before the sky had finished dressing itself in light. A pale hush hovered over the estate, as if the world itself was reluctant to wake. Hana sat quietly by her window, a shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders, her gaze fixed on the soft outlines of the garden emerging from darkness. The first call of a distant bird broke the silence like a single note of a koto string, tentative, expectant. She did not wake Sayo, not yet. The warmth of stillness lingered within her from the day before, the kind of quiet born not from absence, but from deep attention. The fragrances of Otsuki's training still floated through her memory, ghost-like. Agarwood, musk, chrysanthemum. They were no longer just scents. They were moods, shades of emotion, fragments of lives she could not name. When Sayo did arrive, she said nothing of the lesson. She simply bowed and began preparing Hana for the day. There was an unspoken understanding now between them, as if a new chapter had begun in a book they had both been reading silently together. Today's robe was ash blue silk, light and without pattern, chosen so no fragrance might cling to embroidered threads. The comb was left untouched, no powder, no oils. Her skin carried only the softness of water and the memory of the rain. When she returned to the scent chamber, Otsuki was already waiting. A small brazier smoked gently beside her, the room scented with something unfamiliar, something cool, almost bitter. "Borneal," Otsuki said without looking up. "Today we learn the silence between scents." Hana bowed and sat across from her posture perfect, her breath steady. Otsuki placed a black silk cloth between them and unwrapped 3 ivory dishes, each filled with small grains of a different material. "This is not for pleasure," she said. "It is for clarity." She lifted a pinch of the first and brought it near the flame. "Smell. Tell me nothing." The room filled with a warmth that lingered at the base of the throat. A hush spread through Hana's chest. Not sweet, not sharp, just quiet. Otsuki moved on to the second, a scent like dry leaves and distant thunder. And then the third, sandalwood, but richer, deeper than before, like the echo of footsteps in a long corridor. Still, Hana said nothing, only breathed, watched, felt. "Very well," Otsuki murmured as she fanned away the last of the smoke. "Now you will blend." She handed Hana a wooden tray of ingredients, spices, barks, oils, powders. Nothing was labeled. There was no instruction, only the presence of the flame and the weight of expectation. "Choose not what pleases," said Otsuki. "Choose what waits to be heard." Hana closed her eyes. She reached not with her fingers, but with her memory. Not to recall her own past, but the emotions that drifted around her like clouds since arriving at the estate. She thought of the Lord's voice, low and steady. She thought of Lady Akiko's warning, shaped like silk around a blade. She thought of the comb, resting still in her chamber, etched with a crane in flight. She chose one pinch of clove, a breath of crushed bark, a single drop of plum resin. When the mixture burned, the scent that rose was not heavy, not sweet. It was solemn. It felt like the space before words are spoken, the pause that decides everything. Otsuki did not speak for a long while. Then softly, "You are not fast. Good. Those who rush the wind cannot read its direction." The lesson ended with a cup of warm barley tea shared in silence. When Hana stepped outside, the sky had shifted. Pale blue now, brushed with wisps of white. The stones beneath her feet were warm. The sound of the wind in the trees had changed, no longer whispering, but conversing. She returned to her quarters to find a fresh scroll on her table. It bore the Lord's seal. Her breath caught. Slowly she unrolled it. "In your absence, the air still carries you, not your voice, but the way silence lingers after you leave." There was no request, no order, Just those 5 lines and a pressed camellia petal beneath them. Hana held the scroll gently, as though it might dissolve in her hands. The camellia was pale pink, flattened with care, its edges brown slightly, proof that it had been picked not in haste, but with thought. She did not reply. Instead, she walked to the garden, to the stone path near the koi pond, and knelt by the edge. The fish drifted near as if summoned, their scales flashing in the light. One of them, a large silvery one with a black spot near its tail, paused directly below her, hovering. Hana reached into her sleeve and pulled out the scroll. She read it once more, folded it, and placed it into the sleeve of her robe. Then she closed her eyes and whispered, "Not all replies must be written." She rose. Inside her chamber, Sayo had left fresh water for washing, a linen cloth folded like an origami crane, and a tiny dish of candied ginger. The day would continue. There were no declarations, no titles, no promises. But within her, the world had turned a fraction. And sometimes, that was how seasons began. Not with storms or songs, but with the barest shift in wind and scent. A change so gentle, only those who listened could know. The 9th day arrived with a sharpened clarity, as if the mist of previous mornings had been drawn back to reveal the edges of everything. The sky above the compound was a clean slate of pale blue, the trees motionless in the still air. Light poured through the high windows like warmed silk, and every surface, wood, stone, paper, seemed to glow with quiet precision. Hana woke to the rustle of the wind-stirred screen and the faint clink of ceramic from beyond the corridor. She stretched without rising, letting her fingers trace the lines of the futon as if following invisible patterns. Her body felt grounded today, not heavy, but real, as though she had returned to herself after floating in smoke. Sayo entered, bearing a new robe. It was unlike the others she had worn, soft ivory silk with no embroidery, no colored threads. Pure, clean, intentional. Sayo spoke for the first time in days, her voice no louder than the wind. "Lady Fuji has summoned you for preparation." Hana turned her head, her expression calm, but inwardly she felt the note of change tighten across her ribs like a bowstring. Preparation. That word had weight. Within the compound, when used by Lady Fuji, it meant ceremony, and ceremony meant audience. It meant presence in a room that required poise, silence, awareness of every fold of cloth and turn of the wrist. She nodded and rose. The morning passed not with words, but with hands. 2 attendants bathed her with scented water, carefully avoiding any oils. Her hair was combed straight, tied in a low knot, and dusted with ground pearl to reflect the lantern light. Sayo applied a pale pink tint to her lips, barely visible, like the blush on the inside of a shell. When Hana was dressed, she was led through a side corridor rarely used, quiet, narrow, lined with faded tapestries. The ceremony would be held in the moon chamber. She had never entered it before. The moon chamber was spoken of in hushed tones, used only for seasonal poetry gatherings, sacred musical recitals, or rare presentations made directly to Lord Takeda in the presence of his inner court. As she stepped inside, her breath caught. The chamber was round, unlike the other rooms, and open at the top. A high skylight allowed sunlight to fall in a perfect circle onto the polished floor. The walls were paneled with pale wood and mother of pearl, reflecting the light like rippling water. A shallow pool encircled the room, no deeper than a tea bowl, and in its center, a raised platform of smooth cedar. She was not alone. Lady Akiko stood near the edge of the platform, her robe the color of storm clouds, her hair coiled like a question never asked. By her side was a small lacquered table on which rested a folded fan, a dish of crushed incense, and a single white candle. Akiko did not look at her. Lady Fuji approached from the shadows, her steps measured, her posture exact. "Hana," she said, "today you will be tested, not by trial, but by presence. You are to perform the Kodo no Me, the first rite of scent. You will do so before the inner circle." Hana bowed deeply. She felt the beating of her heart like the slow tapping of a drum within her chest, steady but undeniable, not fear, not even excitement, just focus. She was handed a pouch, soft silk, tied with gold thread. Inside were the materials she had selected and blended herself days ago in Otsuki's chamber. She would burn them now, not to please, not to entertain, but to reveal. She stepped onto the platform. All sound in the chamber fell away, the murmurs, the shuffling of robes, even the quiet rippling of water around the room. She knelt. In one fluid motion she prepared the censer, Charcoal placed, flame lit, ash layered, and finally, her scent. A whisper of smoke rose, not thick, not quick. A curl, slow and steady, unfolding like a story remembered in fragments. The scent drifted, amber, bark, a trace of clove. Then the echo of plum. Not sweet, not strong. It carried something older, something that waited in the corners of old houses, in the silences between conversations, in the breath between two people who almost speak but do not. It was restraint and longing and memory. She closed her eyes and bowed. The silence held. Then a sound, barely audible. A single exhale from somewhere in the shadows. Whether it was the Lord or a court poet or one of the house scholars, she didn't know. But it told her everything. She had reached them. When she rose, she did not look up. She walked backward as custom dictated and bowed once more at the edge of the platform. Lady Akiko's gaze met hers as she passed. For the first time, there was something close to approval in her eyes. When Hana returned to her quarters that evening, the day felt suspended, not ended, not yet begun again. The sun had lowered itself into the trees, and the shadows were long and blue. A fresh scroll awaited her. No seal, only 5 words. The scent remained after you. She held it to her chest and closed her eyes. The 9th day had not changed her fate, but it had changed her shape. And in this place of screens and silence, shape was everything. The 10th day emerged with a golden hush, a kind of brightness that did not dazzle, but rather shimmered, soft like light caught in still water. Hana opened her eyes to the scent of sun-warmed cedar. The air carried a faint sweetness, almost like roasted barley, as if the earth itself had steeped overnight and risen again in a more forgiving mood. She sat up slowly, the memory of yesterday's ceremony still curling around her like the trailing hem of her robe. The scroll from the night before still lay unfolded beside her sleeping mat. She hadn't moved it. She couldn't bring herself to tuck it away. The scent remained after you. She let her fingers brush across the calligraphy once more before rising. Sayo arrived with a warmth in her face. Hana had not seen for some time. Perhaps it was the clarity of the sunlight, or the silence that now cloaked them with familiarity instead of formality. She bowed lower than usual and began preparing the water. Hana's robe today was pale green with ivory lining, a spring motif of barely there fern tendrils winding along the edges. It was the kind of garment chosen for morning tea or garden meditation, not ceremony, gentle, intentional, and unburdened. As Sayo brushed her hair, Hana asked softly, "Was it spoken of?" Sayo paused for a breath. "Yes," whispered. "And what did they say?" "That you left silence behind you." It was enough. After breakfast, light rice porridge and a single steamed fig, Hana made her way to the sealed garden. No one had summoned her. No scroll had beckoned. But she felt drawn there, as though something of her still lingered in its stones, its trees, its water. When she arrived, the garden was empty. The maple tree in the center had turned fully now, leaves a riot of crimson and gold. The pool reflected the explosion of color in gentle ripples, interrupted only by a breeze that stirred the surface like a painter's brush. She sat on the same bench as before and closed her eyes. And then she felt it. Not sound, not footsteps, but presence. When she opened her eyes, he was there. Lord Takeda stood at the far side of the pool, beneath the arching branches. He was dressed not in formal robes, but in soft gray, almost indistinct against the stone behind him. He did not speak. He only looked at her, calm, still, as if seeing her not as she was in this moment, but as a sequence of many moments. The first time she entered his chamber, the first words they exchanged, the way she had bowed before the incense. Hana rose and bowed low, but not hurriedly. There was no shame, no fear, only reverence. He approached slowly, his feet making no sound against the stone. When he reached her, he sat not across from her, but beside her, on the bench that barely accommodated two. For a while, they watched the maple leaves fall. Then he spoke. "Yesterday, when you lit the scent, I remembered something I had not thought of in years." Hana turned her head slightly, but did not speak. "I was 16, he continued. Still a boy. I sat in a mountain temple, waiting for the monks to finish their morning rites. There was incense burning on the altar, resin and wet stone. And I remember thinking, even when they are gone, the smoke will linger. That perhaps it was the smoke that held the memory of prayers." He paused. "You reminded me of that." Hana's breath caught, not visibly, but within. He did not reach for her hand. He did not touch her robe. He only sat in stillness. Then he said, "You do not ask for attention. That is why you commanded." She lowered her eyes. "I have known many women who speak with their beauty," he said. "You speak with restraint. It is rarer than gold." The breeze picked up then, rustling the leaves around them, sending a single crimson maple leaf tumbling into the pool. They watched it float. "I will not summon you tonight," he said. "Not because I do not wish to, but because I want you to feel how silence can echo even louder after the drumbeat." Hana nodded quietly. "And when I call for you next," he added, "I hope you bring not a poem, not a robe, not even your scent, just this." He gestured toward the garden, the moment. "This is what I seek." They sat until the sun climbed higher, until the shadows shifted from the pool to the path. He rose without ceremony and walked away, leaving no trail behind. But his words lingered. When Hana returned to her chamber, the scroll was still on the floor. She picked it up, folded it carefully, and placed it into the lacquered box where she kept only her most sacred things. The robe came off. Her hair was let down. She knelt before her writing mat and picked up her brush. But instead of composing a poem, she simply wrote one line: "Not all absence is emptiness." And with that, she set down the brush, unrolled her mat, and lay down in the warm patch of sunlight now stretching across the tatami. She did not sleep. She listened to the garden, to the wind, to the silence he had given her as a gift. And in that quiet, she felt the deep, unfurling echo of something she had never known she wanted. Not affection, not favor, but recognition. And that was its own kind of intimacy. The 11th day stirred awake under a canopy of silvered clouds. There was no rain, no breeze, just a breathless pause, as if the sky itself waited for something unnamed. The air held the faint metallic tang of approaching change, and the garden outside Hana's window sat unusually still. Not even the koi disturbed the pond. Hana remained beneath her blanket longer than usual, her eyes open, her thoughts drifting like lanterns on water. She could still hear his voice from the day before, not as an echo, but as a presence, measured, deliberate, real. "This is what I seek." Those words had not faded. They had settled. When Sayo entered, her steps were even softer than usual. She lit the incense gently, brought in a basin of warmed water, and left a robe of unadorned blue-gray silk on the edge of the mat. No conversation passed between them. Not out of formality, but out of an understanding that some mornings did not ask to be spoken into. As Sayo brushed her hair, Hana reached up and gently touched the comb on the tray. Her comb, the sandalwood one, gifted in silence. She did not use it today. Instead, she let her hair hang loose, heavy down her back, its blackness flowing like ink across a scroll. There were no formal duties assigned that morning. The house felt quieter, not in a diminished way, but like an orchestra waiting for the conductor's hand to rise. She chose to spend her morning in the writing chamber, a quiet annex near the eastern veranda. Few came here. It was where scrolls were copied and repaired, where ink was ground in slow circle, where words lived suspended in silence, waiting to be reborn. She settled near the open screen, where the garden peered in like a curious friend. A blank scroll lay before her. She did not pick up the brush immediately. Instead, she listened to the quiet, to her breath, to the small sounds the world made when no one tried to control it. And then, slowly, she began to write. But not a poem. Not this time. She wrote about her first night in the compound, about the sound of the door sliding shut behind her, and the way her sandals had pressed into the polished floor like apologies. She wrote of the garden she had passed on the way to her chamber, and how she had stared at the moon that night, not knowing where to place her longing. She wrote not for praise, not for presentation, but for herself. Her story flowed like tea poured gently into a bowl, without rush, without waste. By the time she set down the brush, the clouds had begun to shift. Afternoon arrived with a quiet summons. Lady Fuji requested her presence. She was led to the west corridor, where rooms were used for internal council and private deliberation. The corridor itself was lined with woodblock prints of birds, cranes, egrets, and sparrows in flight. The light here was softer, filtered through lattice screens. Lady Fuji waited in a small chamber, seated by a brazier and sipping from a porcelain cup. Hana bowed and waited. "Sit," Lady Fuji said, without warmth but also without coldness. Hana obeyed. For a moment, the silence held between them. Then Lady Fuji spoke. You have been noticed. Hana inclined her head. I understand. There are many kinds of notice, Lady Fuji continued. Admiration, curiosity, desire. But the most dangerous is recognition. Hana lifted her eyes slowly. Why dangerous? Lady Fuji set down her cup and looked directly at her. Because recognition cannot be undone. The words settled between them like stones dropped in a quiet pond. You have shown yourself, she said, not with ambition, not with display, but by allowing what is within you to be seen. Hana did not respond. There was nothing to defend and no need to agree. Lord Takeda is not a man to be easily moved, Lady Fuji continued. And when he is moved, the house shifts with him. There will be speculation. There will be maneuvering. There will be watching. I have nothing to hide, Hana said. Lady Fuji's eyes narrowed, not unkindly. No, but what you do not say will be more dangerous than anything you declare. She paused, then stood, signaling the conversation's end. You may go, but be still. A still branch bends farther in the storm. As Hana returned to her chamber, her steps were light, but her heart was full. She understood now what had changed, not just within the compound, but within herself. She was no longer navigating survival. She was now balancing truth. That evening, she did not write. She did not recite poetry. She did not sit by the window watching the wind. Instead, she walked the inner garden path alone, slowly, letting the cool stones guide her forward. The wind picked up, lifting her sleeves, brushing her hair across her cheeks. And then from a high window somewhere behind her, the faint scent of agarwood drifted down. A memory, perhaps, or a message. But she did not stop to decide. She walked on, soft-footed and sure, like a figure already woven into the story the house was beginning to tell. The 12th day opened with the sound of wind slipping between bamboo stalks. It was a restless kind of breeze, not violent, not loud, but persistent, as though it had been searching all night for the right window to whisper through. Hana stood in the courtyard before dawn, her feet bare against the cool stone, the hem of her robe fluttering gently around her ankles. She had awakened before the bells, before Sayo, drawn not by duty or routine, but by a quiet urgency within her bones. The stars had already begun to fade when the first color crept into the sky, pale lavender bruising into soft gold. She watched the changing light in silence, each passing moment carrying with it something unspoken, something half-formed. Behind her, the screen slid open softly. Sayo appeared, robe wrapped tight, hair still unbound from the night. She said nothing. She only stepped forward and draped a shawl over Hana's shoulders. You'll catch a chill, she murmured. Hana nodded, but did not move. The day had not yet begun, and yet she felt it, like a hand pressed gently against the center of her back. Something was approaching. She could not name it, but it pulsed just beneath the surface of every breath. By mid-morning, the compound had shifted. She could sense it in the way the servants moved, brisk, careful, quiet. Whispered exchanges passed behind sliding doors. A hush in the air, even when nothing was being said. She was not summoned to the scent chamber, nor to the writing room. Instead, Lady Fuji requested her presence once more. Sayo prepared her in silence, brushing her hair back into a single loose knot, pinning it with the sandalwood comb. The robe she wore was cream-colored, with thin plum blossoms embroidered along the sleeves. Not festive, not somber, neutral, a robe without message. The walk to the inner hall took longer than usual. Not because of distance, but because Hana chose each step with care, anchoring herself. She remembered Lady Fuji's words. Recognition cannot be undone. When she entered, the room was already occupied. 3 men, all seated near the windows, each dressed in layered gray and indigo robes, scholars by the look of their ink-stained sleeves. Beside them sat a woman Hana had not seen before, older than Akiko, with eyes like still water and lips painted in a perfect crimson line. And then in the center, Lord Takeda. He was not dressed in the plain attire he wore for garden walks or poetry readings. Today he wore his formal robes, layered silk dyed in deep hues of pine and midnight. His hair was gathered high, and his face, though calm, bore the quiet gravity of a man who expected to be remembered for what he said next. Hana bowed deeply. She was invited to kneel upon the central cushion, facing the Lord, with the scholars and women forming a half circle around them. No one spoke for several minutes. Then Lord Takeda's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. You have brought scent where there was only smoke. He paused, his gaze resting on her. You have made silence speak louder than voices. He gestured to the woman beside him. This is Lady Sumi. She is my advisor in the poetic court of the capital. She has returned early this season to observe matters within the house. Lady Sumi nodded, expression unreadable. Lord Takeda continued. She has recommended that I name a keeper of fragrance, a ceremonial role, rarely filled, tasked with crafting and curating the scents that accompany the house's most sacred rituals. It is not an honor. It is a responsibility. Hana felt her breath still, suspended in the space between thought and feeling. He looked directly into her. And I have decided that it shall be you. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of meaning, of history, of futures gathering like storm clouds at the edges of a field. One of the scholars made a small note on a scroll. Lady Sumi studied Hana's face as though reading a passage she had not yet decided whether to praise or burn. Finally, the Lord added, You may refuse. But Hana did not. She bowed lower than she ever had before, her voice a whisper made of breath and resolve. I accept. A bell chimed in the distance, marking the hour. The wind outside rattled the bamboo again, louder this time. And Hana knew the season had turned. That evening, when she returned to her chamber, she found it subtly changed. A new lacquered box had been placed beside her writing table. Within it, small vials, unlabeled, alongside scrolls bearing the crest of the inner court. A message was folded beneath them, bearing no name. Fragrance is not decoration. It is memory made visible. She touched the vials gently, reverently. She knew the path ahead would not be quiet. This role would place her in view. She would be seen by more than the Lord. She would be expected to listen, to interpret, to shape experiences not through voice, but through air. But she felt no fear, only the calm certainty of belonging. That night, as the lanterns were lit outside her chamber and the sound of the wind softened into something almost like song, Hana sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed, a blank scroll before her. And in the dark, she whispered a new vow, not to him, not to the court, but to herself. To remain still, even when everything else begins to move. The 13th day began with a hush so complete it felt sacred. No breeze stirred the leaves outside Hana's chamber. No footsteps echoed through the corridors. Even the birds, usually chattering by first light, seemed to hold their songs in reverence. The morning felt suspended, like a moment between breaths, too fragile to disturb. Hana sat at her writing table, not writing. The scroll before her remained untouched. Her inkstone had been prepared, the brush resting beside it like a sleeping creature, but her hand did not move. She was not waiting for words to come. She was learning how to sit in their absence. The previous day's declaration, the appointment as keeper of fragrance, still pulsed quietly in her bones. She had received no further instructions, no schedule, no title spoken aloud beyond that chamber. Yet everything had shifted. She could feel it in the silence of those who passed her in the corridors, in the subtle deference in the eyes of the younger concubines, in the way Sayo now watched her with a quiet, proud distance. It was as if she had passed through an invisible threshold, and the house around her had adjusted its weight in response. By mid-morning, she was summoned, not by Lady Fuji, but by Lady Sumi herself. Sayo dressed her carefully in a robe of pale gold and ivory. It bore no embroidery, only a soft sheen like moonlight on lacquered wood. Her hair was left loose again, but this time fastened with a thin silver pin shaped like a falling petal. The path to the archive hall was unfamiliar to her. Unlike the grand ceremonial rooms, the archive hall was tucked behind a wing, seldom walked by others. It smelled of ink, aged cedar, and paper left undisturbed for generations. Dust motes danced in the high beams, catching the light like gold thread and cloth. Lady Sumi waited inside, seated at a long table covered in scrolls, fans, and scent boxes wrapped in silk. She did not rise when Hana entered, only motioned for her to kneel across from her. This room, she began, her voice low and clear, holds the soul of the house. She unrolled a scroll and pushed it toward Hana. It was a list, long, written in tight script, names, dates, and fragrances. These are the compositions created by your predecessors, Lady Sumi said. Not just for rituals, for moments, for turning points. Hana scanned the lines, the elegance of the descriptions catching her breath. First snow, the year of mourning, white camphor and bitter clove. Birth of air, third moon, steamed rice husk, sweet pine resin, final visit of the southern priest, tobacco flower and moss-washed agar. They wrote history, Lady Sumi said. Not with ink, but with air. She set a small wooden box before Hana, unlocking it with a thin iron key. Inside were slivers of fragrant wood, vials of oil, dried petals, powders. You will be given no assistant, no schedule, no announcements will be made, but you will be expected to prepare. For what? Hana asked. For everything, Sumi replied. Then, for the first time, she looked directly into Hana's eyes. There is no honor in this role, only risk. To speak through scent is to speak what others will not say aloud. She reached for one of the slivers of wood and held it up to the light. Sometimes, a single whiff of ash can remind a man of guilt. A crushed petal can stir memories he had spent years trying to bury. Hana said nothing. Sumi's voice softened. You have already done this. The Lord cannot stop thinking of you, because you reminded him of silence. That is your power. She pushed the box forward. Begin learning what silence smells like. When Hana returned to her chamber, the box was in her arms. That afternoon, she did not leave her room. She unwrapped each vial, each folded packet, each curled shaving of wood. One by one, she ground them lightly, let the heat of her palm warm the oils, watched the smoke curl from small dishes. She did not rush. By sunset, her chamber no longer smelled like any one thing. It was a tapestry, a drifting collection of memories, of colors that had no name. Cedar and dried plum, rice straw and ghost flower, a trace of crushed ginger, faint as regret. Sayo entered in the evening and paused at the doorway. She took one breath and smiled faintly. It feels like something has ended, she said. Hana looked up. No, she whispered. Something has begun. Later that night, long after the lanterns were doused and only moonlight crept through the window screens, Hana lit a single stick of incense, one she had blended herself. She did not name it. She let it speak in its own way, curling gently through the air, folding over her futon, her pillow, the comb resting on the lacquer tray. And as she closed her eyes, the scent settled around her like a promise. She would not just fill the room, she would become it. The 14th day dawned with the golden hush of early autumn. The sun's warmth had softened, brushing gently through the latticework screens, casting lattice shadows across the floor like a second garden made of light. Outside, the wind stirred the reeds by the pond, and small brown leaves drifted silently across the courtyard, spiraling as if hesitant to settle. Hana rose early, her body moving before her thoughts fully arrived. Her limbs held the calm of a long night's stillness, and her heart was steady, quiet. The scent of last night's incense still lingered faintly, woven into the fabric of her robe, into the fibers of the pillow, into the air itself. It had become part of her now, part of the rhythm that filled the space around her. Sayo entered with her usual grace, but paused at the threshold. She bowed a little deeper than usual, then stepped inside and gently placed a folded note upon the table. Her eyes flicked once to Hana's, but she said nothing. Hana crossed the room in silence, lifted the note, and opened it. There was no seal, no signature, just a single line of ink, delicate and restrained. Tomorrow the chrysanthemum will bloom. It was not a message that demanded interpretation. In the world behind the painted screens, such poetry always carried purpose. The chrysanthemum ceremony, an annual ritual observed by the house in private reverence, would begin at dusk on the 15th day. Only select members of the inner household were ever permitted to attend. It was whispered that those invited offered silent prayers not only for longevity, as tradition stated, but also for memory and forgetting. It was a time for reflection, a night where the air itself was meant to shimmer with something older than tradition, where scent, silence, and memory would intertwine beneath the lantern glow like threads in an invisible tapestry. Hana would be expected to prepare the offering of fragrance. No announcement would be made. She simply knew. By midday, the preparation had begun. She returned to the archive hall, where Lady Sumi awaited her beside a spread of scrolls detailing previous chrysanthemum compositions. Some were bright, blends of citrus rind and crushed chrysanthemum petals steeped in warm rice oil. Others were somber, infusions of fermented bark, aged sandalwood and smoke. Lady Sumi watched as Hana read. You may use the old recipes, she said softly, but you may also let them go. Hana nodded. What is this ceremony meant to remember? Sumi's gaze did not shift. what we choose to forget. No more was said. Hana worked alone through the afternoon. No one entered the chamber. No servants brought food. Time itself seemed to bend around the space where she ground her ingredients, weighed powders, and tested oils by letting them bloom gently over heated bowls. The final composition did not come easily. She discarded 3 versions before finding the 4th. It began with the dried heart of white chrysanthemum petals, pressed in age from the previous year's bloom. To this she added ghost pepper leaf, not for heat but for the way it flared and faded like a memory of shame. Then a trace of persimmon wood, sun-cured, brittle, and bitter. And finally, a drop of rain-distilled camphor oil, cold and sharp, to cleanse the end of it all. She lit the test bowl. The scent rose slowly, not sweet, not cruel. It smelled like a season ending, like the moment a name is spoken aloud for the last time, like standing alone in a familiar place that no longer knows your shape. She bowed before the rising smoke. It was ready. As evening fell, Hana returned to her quarters and bathed. Sayo said little, but her hands were gentle as she dressed her in a robe of deep indigo threaded with silver chrysanthemums. The robe had not been worn in years. It had belonged to a former keeper, one who had left the estate before Hana's arrival, her name now spoken only in whispers, if at all. When Hana stepped into the courtyard, the compound had changed. Lanterns floated in shallow bowls across the garden pond. Petals lined the walkways. Silent figures moved like shadows, each dressed in robes of twilight hues, blues, silvers, purples, no color brighter than dusk. She followed the path to the ceremony hall, where a circle of elders, poets, and quiet wives waited. Lord Takeda sat in silence at the center, his robe dark and unadorned, his hands folded on his lap. She approached with the offering bowl. The scent, her scent, drifted ahead of her. As she knelt and placed the bowl in the center of the circle, no words were spoken, but the air shifted. Heads bowed. The incense began to rise, and with it came silence, not empty but full. Each breath drawn into the lungs was memory. Each exhale was release. Some wept quietly. Others closed their eyes and remembered names, voices, or dreams long buried. The fragrance filled the space slowly, evenly, respectfully. Hana remained kneeling, her hands resting on her thighs, her eyes fixed on the smoke as it curled toward the ceiling like a soul untethering. And in that moment, she understood her purpose. Not as decoration, not as performer, not even as companion. She was the one who named what could not be said, who carried scent like language, who reminded the house of things it had chosen to forget, and offered a gentler way to remember. When the ceremony ended, no one approached her. She did not expect them to, but as she passed Lord Takeda on her way out, she felt it. A pause in his breath, a moment of stillness in the tilt of his head. He did not look at her. He didn't need to, the scent remained. And that was enough. The 15th day began in silence, but not the sacred kind. This silence was thick and waiting, like a curtain drawn across a stage before the actors return, or the air just before snow begins to fall. There was no wind. Even the birds in the courtyard trees had quieted. The petals from the chrysanthemum ceremony still clung to the stone pathways, bruised and half-faded, trailing like forgotten wishes. Hana remained on her futon longer than usual. Her eyes were open, but her body did not stir. The air in her chamber was faintly perfumed with the remnants of last night's offering, an after-image of chrysanthemum and camphor that clung to her hair, her robe, her breath. Sayo entered wordlessly. She did not bring a robe or prepare tea. Instead, she knelt and laid a folded slip of paper upon Hana's pillow. This time, the seal was the Lord's, pressed in deep crimson wax, the Keda crest. Hana sat up slowly and broke the seal. The note was brief. "The scent you summoned yesterday. I have not stopped breathing it." There was no summons, no request, only that line. But she understood. A moment later, Sayo placed a robe across the bench. Deep ash gray silk, light enough to move like smoke and entirely unadorned. The absence of embroidery, of decoration, was deliberate. It was the kind of robe worn not for attention, but for gravity, for the carrying of something unseen. Hana bathed slowly, letting her hands rest in the water long after the warmth had faded. Her fingers were pruned and pale when she finally rose. Sayo helped dress her with care. She combed Hana's hair until it lay flat as lacquer, then pulled it into a single loop bound with a thin black cord. There were no hairpins, no ornaments. When she stepped into the corridor, The air was colder. The clouds hung low, heavy with the promise of change. The house seemed to lean in around her, its silence more pointed than before. Servants passed her with lowered gazes, and the rustle of her robes was the only sound she carried down the winding hall. She was led not to a chamber, but to the garden. Not the plum garden, not the sealed one, but the hidden garden. The one at the northern edge of the compound, surrounded by tall stone walls and thick stands of pine and cypress. It was a place spoken of only in whispers, a place not for walks or poetry, but for decisions. The Lord waited alone, seated on a low bench beneath an ancient cedar. He was not dressed formally, a dark robe, unlayered, no sash. His hair was tied carelessly, as though he had not expected to be seen. Hana bowed low, the cold of the stones pressing through the thin soles of her sandals. When she rose, he gestured to the bench beside him. She sat, keeping a respectful distance. They did not speak immediately. The garden was not manicured. Moss covered the stones, and the air was dense with the scent of pine needles and damp wood. It felt older than the house, older than them. Finally, his voice came, rougher than before. "You stirred something last night." Hana turned her head slightly, listening. "Not just in me," he added. "In the room, in the air, in the people who have served my family longer than I've been alive." He exhaled slowly. "You made us remember things we buried too deeply." She folded her hands in her lap. That was the intention. He looked at her then fully, not as lord to concubine, but as man to woman. His gaze was not searching, it was seeing. "I have had many favorites," he said quietly, "some for beauty, some for cleverness, some for the way they made the hours pass." She said nothing. "But I have never feared one," he finished. Still, Hana did not reply, because fear was not a word she had ever desired to inspire. But she understood it in his voice. He feared what she awakened, because once a man remembers what he chose to forget, he is never the same. He reached into his sleeve and removed a small object, wrapped in silk no larger than a teacup. He handed it to her. Hana took it carefully. When she unfolded the cloth, a small ceramic vessel revealed itself. Its glaze was cracked and faded, the surface worn. A scent bowl. She recognized it instantly. It was ancient, the kind used in imperial rites before the shogunate. "I had it sealed away," he said, "because I believed no one in this house was worthy of it." She looked at the bowl, then at him. "And now?" he answered with silence, and then softer. "Now I think perhaps the bowl was waiting." They sat for a while longer in the cold garden. No more was said. When Hana returned to her chamber, the bowl still in her hands, the wind had begun to rise. It stirred the curtains, tugged at the corners of the scrolls on her writing table, lifted the sleeves of her robe as if beckoning. She placed the bowl in the center of the room and sat before it. She did not burn anything. She did not write. She simply sat. The chrysanthemum ceremony had opened something. This moment had deepened it. And in the silence of the 15th night, the woman once chosen for her quiet beauty began to understand the truth of her own presence. She was no longer passing through the house like scent through open doors. She was the fragrance that lingered after everyone else had left. The 16th day came cloaked in cold. A brittle wind swept through the corridors, rattling the shoji screens and lifting the last of the garden's yellow leaves into the air. They fell like faint applause upon the stone pathways, scattering in delicate spirals before vanishing into silence. The season had turned fully now. Autumn no longer hovering at the edge of summer, but settled, certain, unmoving. Hana rose before dawn. She had not slept much. The scent bowl from the hidden garden remained where she had placed it the evening before, its glazed surface catching the low light like water frozen mid-motion. She sat before it, her knees folded, her hands in her lap. She did not yet know what scent it would hold. That decision could not be made in haste, or even in thought. It had to rise slowly, like memory, like grief. A soft knock at the door. Sayo entered with 2 folded robes and a sealed scroll. Hana read the seal first. Lady Sumi. She opened the scroll slowly, careful not to tear the paper at its fragile folds. The calligraphy was sharp, more precise than usual, intentional. "A guest will arrive today from the southern provinces. He is a friend to the Lord, but not to this house. You will be present for the evening's gathering. You will prepare the air." There was no signature, just a pressed leaf, green, veined, and freshly plucked. Sayo said nothing as she set down the robes, but her eyes lingered. The presence of an outsider was rare. Even rarer still was for one to be invited into a setting where the concubines, and particularly Hana, would be present. "What do you know of him?" Hana asked. Sayo hesitated, then replied in a whisper. "He is a governor's son, rich, educated, sharp as ice. He speaks with praise but smells of iron." Hana nodded. It was enough. The rest of the morning passed in focused preparation. She did not wander the gardens or sit in the literary room. Instead, she opened the drawers of her wooden case and began testing oils and woods, unfamiliar combinations she had never dared to attempt. This was not a ceremony, not a ritual. This was something far more fragile, a balance between beauty and warning. She blended lightly, green myrtle to evoke civility, black cedar to root the air in stillness, a trace of dried uma blossom for formality. And then, the final note, smoked bamboo leaf, so faint it might not be noticed at all, and yet sharp enough to linger in the memory like a blade hidden within a fan. By the time the sun began to fall behind the high walls, her blend was ready. The robe she chose was dark plum, nearly black in the evening light, with wide sleeves and a simple ivory cord. Sayo wove her hair into a narrow braid and fastened it at the base of her neck with a silver pin, an old court style, elegant but austere. When Hana entered the reception chamber, the gathering had just begun. Low lanterns flickered along the floor. The Lord sat at the head of the room on an elevated platform, a single candle burning at his side. His expression was calm, but his posture was tighter than usual, and beside him, the guest. He was young, perhaps only a few years older than Hana, but carried himself like a man who had long been assured of his own importance. His robes were embroidered with gold thread, a boldness rare even in noble houses, and his hands were covered in rings. He glanced toward her as she entered, and for a breath, something flared in his eyes. Not desire, not awe, calculation. Hana bowed deeply and took her place behind the incense stand. The coals were already lit. The scent began to rise, soft at first, then steady. Conversation resumed. The guests spoke often, of conquests, of court dances, of politics in Kyoto. His words were honeyed, but his tone was sharpened by an edge that never dulled. Every story seemed designed not to share, but to measure the room. Hana watched without watching. She listened without appearing to do so. And all the while, her scent curled through the air. Lord Takeda said little. He sipped his tea slowly, his gaze shifting at intervals to Hana, not for instruction, not for comfort, but for anchoring. When the guest finally commented on the air, "There is something unfamiliar here, almost foreign," Lord Takeda responded without pause. "It is not foreign. It is the scent of restraint." The guest laughed, but it did not reach his eyes. Later, as the gathering drew to its end and the last dish of tea sweets was cleared, the guests stood and bowed to the Lord. "I thank you for your hospitality," he said, "and for this atmosphere so carefully arranged." He turned then directly to Hana. "And you, tell me, was this fragrance meant to please me or to disarm me?" Her voice was soft, but unshaken. "Neither," she replied. "It was meant to remind you that not all beauty blooms for the plucking." The room fell into silence. The guest's smile faltered for just a breath before returning. He offered a polite bow and departed with his entourage, his footsteps echoing too loudly on the stone. When the chamber emptied, Lord Takeda rose and approached her. "You spoke more truth in one breath than I did all evening," he said. She did not answer. Instead, she turned and collected the censer, gently fanning the last of the smoke from the room. And as the final curl vanished into the night, she whispered not to him, but to herself. "Let the world see only the fragrance, never the fire that birthed it." Then she disappeared down the corridor like her own scent, quiet, ungraspable, unforgettable. The 17th day opened with a sky the color of ink. Clouds hung low, heavy with the weight of unfallen rain. The wind had gone still again, as if the world were holding its breath after the tension of the night before. Somewhere in the garden, a single crow called out, a harsh, echoing cry that was answered by no other. In the quiet of her chamber, Hana sat alone. She had risen early, but not out of restlessness. It was habit now. This hour between darkness and light belonged to her, and she guarded it like one might a letter never sent. The scent bowl from 2 days ago remained at her side, cold now, the ashes inside soft as silk. She had not lit anything yet, not incense, not oil. Some silences deserve to stretch a little longer. Sayo entered with care, her expression unreadable. She placed a tray with barley, tea, and 2 slices of pickled plum beside the writing table. Then, without word or gesture, she stepped to the window and opened the screen slightly. The air that entered was damp and chill. It carried no fragrance. "No scroll today," Sayo said after a moment. "No summons." Hana nodded once. It was to be a day of stillness. But silence in the compound never meant inactivity. Beneath the calm, she sensed something shifting, subtle but unmistakable, like watching ripples grow across the surface of water long after the stone has vanished beneath it. She dressed herself in soft, cream-colored linen, a working robe with wide sleeves and no adornment. Her hair she tied loosely with a thread of woven silk. Today would not be for display. Instead of wandering the gardens or seeking instruction, she returned to the scent chamber. The small, secluded space now felt more hers than any other place in the estate. Its walls still bore the marks of Otsuki's presence: old scrolls, fragments of pressed leaves, faded samples wrapped in paper too delicate to unfold. But the old woman herself had not appeared in days. Hana sat before the mixing table, opening the small drawers one by one, not to select, but to learn anew what she had once overlooked. She did not blend today. She studied, she inhaled the scent of old sandalwood, aged too long, its fragrance now brittle and smoky. She tested powdered camellia husk with a hint of mint, once used in spring rituals to signal renewal. She opened a long-forgotten vial labeled only with a single character: cow, face. The scent inside was faint but intimate, like clean linen warmed by the sun. What did it mean for a fragrance to hold the memory of skin? What was a scent, if not the trace left behind by something already gone? Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the vial. She had begun to understand something deeper about her work. It was not only a craft, it was a form of storytelling, but not in words, not even in images. Her scents did not narrate, they evoked. They suggested what could not be remembered fully, only felt. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, a knock came at the chamber's sliding door. A quiet voice followed, one she had not heard in many days. "Otsuki." Hana opened the door, heart stilling. The old woman looked thinner than before, her face more sunken, her eyes darker, like the ink of an overused brush. "You've begun to sense your own silence," Otsuki said. "That's when I knew you were ready." Hana helped her inside, no words needed. Otsuki sat slowly by the mixing table and ran her fingers over the surface of the cedar. "Most never learn the final lesson," she said after a long pause. Hana waited. The difference between scent and smoke. Otsuki gestured toward the ashes in the unused bowl. Smoke disappears. It marks an ending, but scent lingers. It stays on the robe, on the skin, in the air, long after the flame dies. Hana nodded slowly. "And if it clings too long? Then it becomes memory," Otsuki replied. "And memory, child, is the most dangerous thing of all." They sat together until evening. Otsuki said no more. She rested her hands upon the table and closed her eyes. For a moment, Hana thought she had fallen asleep, but then she whispered almost inaudibly, "You must scent the future now." When the old woman left, her steps slow and sure, Hana remained seated. She picked up a new scroll and began to write, not a poem, not a recipe, but fragments. Sensations, a map of feeling without geography, smoke from autumn pine, skin warmed by fear. The silence between an answer and a lie. The breath a woman takes before she forgives. The scent of regret, too proud to name itself. She would not blend these yet, but one day she would. That night she lit no incense. She let the room breathe on its own, let the air return to its barest truth. And for the first time since arriving at the compound, Hana did not fall asleep thinking of what had passed. She dreamed only of what had not yet been. The 18th day arrived, cloaked in a dull, persistent rain. It was not a storm, there was no thunder, no violence in the sky, but a steady rhythm of falling water that softened the edges of everything. The paths became streams. The lantern posts wore droplets like pearls. The bamboo leaves shimmered beneath the weight of the morning. Inside her chamber, Hana sat by the open screen, watching the garden blur through the veil of rain. The scent of wet earth, damp pine, and the faint perfume of decaying chrysanthemums filled the air. The flowers from the ceremony were wilting now, petals folding inward, stems bending with quiet grace, as though retreating into themselves. There had been no word from Lord Takeda since the gathering. No scroll, no whispered summons. But Hana did not feel forgotten. She had become something else now. Not a presence waiting to be called, but one that lingered even in absence. She rose slowly and bathed in silence, the rain tapping lightly against the cedar beams overhead. Sayo brought her a robe of gray silk streaked with silver threads, like brushstrokes across a stormy sky. She dressed without instruction. Her movements were slow, deliberate, every layer a ritual. Today, she would not blend. Today, she would listen. By mid-morning, she walked the estate with no destination. The corridors were empty. Most of the house remained indoors, avoiding the rain, preserving warmth. But Hana was drawn outside. The garden paths were slick, the stones dark with moisture. Her sandals left no sound as she moved. The koi pond was full, its surface dimpled with drops, the fish hiding beneath the lily pads. Beyond the plum grove, near the secluded tea pavilion, she found herself standing beneath an old cypress. And there, under its broad limbs, was Lady Akiko, the first. She held no parasol. Her robe was pale lavender, and the hem was soaked. Her hair, though pinned high, had loosened slightly in the rain. She stood still, gazing into the distance, not startled by Hana's arrival. "You walked the garden today?" she asked, her voice carrying through the hush. "I do," Hana replied softly. Akiko turned her head slightly, studying her. "You're not afraid of wet sleeves?" "No," Hana said. "I find the water honest." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Akiko's lips. They stood there together for a time, neither seeking to leave. Then Akiko spoke again, her voice lower now, meant only for Hana's ears. "You've unsettled him." Hana did not pretend to misunderstand. Akiko continued, "He no longer asks me for scent, or poems, or silence. He asks for your presence, even when he does not summon it." Hana looked to the ground. The moss beneath the cypress shimmered in the rain, rich and green. "I did not intend to unsettle," she said. Akiko's gaze grew sharp. "That is why you did." There was no bitterness in her tone, only understanding. It was not a challenge. It was a recognition between two women who had learned different languages within the same walls. Akiko stepped forward then and handed Hana something small, wrapped in oiled paper and bound with string. "For your records," she said. Hana unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a scroll, a recipe. Not from her own hand, but Akiko's. The ink was fine, the script elegant. It detailed a composition Hana had never seen before. Wild iris root, dried yuzu peel, powdered sandal ash, and sea fennel oil. She looked up, eyes wide. Akiko met her gaze evenly. "From before I became what I am now," she said, "I thought I had forgotten how it felt to create." "Why give this to me?" Hana asked, voice barely above the rain. "Because it belongs to the woman I was," Akiko said, "and I think you will know what to do with her." Then she turned and walked back through the garden, her robe trailing like mist behind her. Hana stood in the rain for a long time, scroll pressed to her chest. By the time she returned to her chamber, the sky had grown darker. The rain continued. She lit a candle, unrolled the scroll once more, and laid it beside her other records. But she did not copy it. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, trying to imagine the scent, not just its ingredients, but its feeling. It would not be soft, not decorative. It would be wild, salted with longing, bitter with knowledge, rooted in something deeper than memory, something like knowing. She rose and placed the scent bowl at the center of her chamber. She added nothing to it. She simply sat. She thought of the sea, of women who chose silence, and women who weaponized it, of what it meant to carry someone else's forgotten voice. And as the wind pressed against the shutters, she whispered a promise into the darkness. "I will remember for both of us." And the rain answered with a rhythm that sounded, just faintly, like applause. The 19th day began with a breath of warmth, unexpected after so many cold mornings. It lingered in the air like the echo of an early spring, though the leaves still fell in steady rhythm from the trees, and the clouds overhead remained low and pale. It was not the warmth of weather, but something quieter, like a secret held close, or the moment after a confession when no one speaks. Hana awoke before the bell, her hands still folded across her chest as though in prayer. The scent bowl at her side had cooled, the ashes untouched from the day before. But the scroll Akiko had given her rested on the writing table, unrolled slightly by the breeze as if urging her to begin. She did not blend it. Not yet. Instead, she stepped into the garden. Mist rose from the stones. The pond was quiet, the koi motionless in the stillness beneath the surface. The cypress under which she and Akiko had stood was still dripping from the night's rain. Its needles glistened like glass in the faint light. She knelt there again, just as she had before, and closed her eyes, not to think, to feel, to remember a scent not yet made. Inside, Sayo waited patiently. She had already prepared the day's robe, a soft blue-gray with narrow cuffs, suited for work, not performance. Her eyes flickered once toward the scroll on the table, then back to Hana, who said nothing. Together they moved through the rituals of the morning. A basin of warm water, a brush through her long black hair, a single strip of white cloth tied around her waist like a belt of silence. And then a knock. Unexpected. Sayo opened the screen. Lady Fuji stood there. She was not accompanied by attendants. Her robe was dark olive, heavy, almost ceremonial, though her presence was restrained, purposeful. She stepped into the room and regarded Hana with the calm of someone used to being feared but not needing to wield it. "There is a letter," she said, "from the southern provinces." Hana straightened slightly. "From the guest?" "Yes," Lady Fuji replied. "He has written to the Lord." She paused. "And he has mentioned you." Hana said nothing. Lady Fuji's gaze remained steady. "He described you as a figure of smoke with a voice of distance. Why, he says your scent was too precise to be accidental." Still, Hana did not speak. Lady Fuji approached the low table and placed a second scroll there, this one unsealed. "He wants your blend," she said. "He wishes to carry it to his own house. He believes it will make his court listen to him more carefully." Hana's throat tightened. "And the Lord?" she asked. Lady Fuji's voice remained measured. "He will not permit it, but he will not say why." She turned then, and for the first time a flicker of something passed through her expression. Not threat, not anger, concern. "There are eyes on you now," she said. "Some admiring, some suspicious, and one, perhaps, envious." She let the words hang. Then she added, more softly, "You must choose how visible you wish to become." When she left, the chamber fell silent again. Hana stood for a long while, unmoving. The scroll from the guest remained unopened on the table, but she did not need to read it. She already knew its contents. She had scented not just his breath, but his intent, and it had clung to him like oil. She crossed to her records and opened Akiko's scroll once more. This time she began. The blending was different than usual. She worked slowly, pausing after each ingredient, letting the aroma settle before adding the next. Wild iris root, earthy, a little bitter. Yuzu peel, bright, acidic, cutting. Sandal ash, smoke without fire. Sea fennel, green, briny, like a memory of salt left on skin. She lit a small bowl. The scent that rose was not pleasant in the traditional sense. It was alive. It smelled like memory being rewritten, like power unadorned. She stepped back, allowing it to fill the room. Even Sayo, who had returned with fresh tea, hesitated at the threshold before kneeling, slowly, as if entering a shrine. "It feels like something is watching," she said under her breath. "No," Hana replied softly. "It feels like something is awakening." She did not send the scent. She made no reply to the southern guest. Instead, she wrote a single line in her record book and pressed a leaf from the garden into the margin. To carry a fragrance without understanding it is to carry fire in bare hands. That evening, no lanterns were lit outside her chamber, but the scent of the blend remained, drifting slowly down the corridor. And more than one person stopped, breathing it in, unsure whether they were remembering something long forgotten or fearing something just now born. The 20th day arrived with a sudden, startling stillness. Even the rain, ever present in recent days, had paused. The sky above the compound was washed clear, a soft canvas of winter blue, streaked faintly with threads of sunlight. In the distance, smoke rose from the kitchen hearths, pale and clean, curling upward like the tail of an unseen brushstroke. Hana opened her eyes slowly. She had dreamt of nothing, not of gardens, not of voices, not of scent, only silence, endless and whole, like standing in a vast room with no walls. When she sat up, the air in her chamber was cool, but not cold. The scent from the day before still lingered in the corners, Akiko's blend, reborn through Hana's hand. It had faded now to its final note, a breath of fennel and ash, like the sea remembered only by those who had once drowned. Sayo entered without her usual tray. Instead, she carried a lacquered box, deep red with black hinges, and placed it gently on the floor before Hana. She bowed low. "The Lord requests your presence in the inner chamber," she said. "He asks that you bring the scent you created yesterday." Hana nodded, calm. She did not ask for further explanation. She didn't need one. The box she had been given bore the mark of the Takeda family's private archive. It was used only for offerings, ritual blends sealed and stored for use in the Lord's private rooms, for memory, for mourning, or for power. She washed her hands in silence, dressed in a simple robe of moss green silk, and tied her hair back with a single strand of white thread. No pin, no decoration. The scent she carried today would do the speaking. By the time she arrived at the inner chamber, the house had fallen into a hush. The attendants outside the Lord's door bowed deeply and stepped aside without a word. One of them opened the screen, revealing a room dimly lit by a single paper lantern. Lord Takeda sat at the center, alone. No retinue, no music, no fanfare. He wore dark robes, charcoal black with a lining of gold thread just visible at the edges. His hands rested in his lap, unmoving. His face was unreadable, not guarded but emptied, as though he had already spent the words he once intended to say. Hana stepped inside, knelt without hesitation, and placed the lacquered box on the low table between them. She opened it. The scent rose, soft at first, then unmistakable. Akiko's blend now reborn, but it was not hers anymore. It belonged to this room, to this moment, to what was now about to unfold. The Lord inhaled once, then again, his eyes closed slowly, and then he spoke, not to her, not as Lord to Concubine, but as a man unraveling something he had kept bound far too long. "This scent, I wore it once." Hana listened. "It clung to my sleeves the day my father died." A pause. "The day I became master of this house." He opened his eyes. "She wore it then, Akiko, before the court knew her name, before she spoke her first poem aloud." The silence that followed was not empty. It throbbed with what had not been said for years. "She burned it the day after," he said, "and never wore it again." Hana bowed her head. "She gave it to me." "I know," he said. "That is why I called you here." He reached forward, not to take the scent, but to close the box himself, gently, as one might shut the lid of a coffin. "She gave it to you," he said, "because she needed to let go. And I gave you this moment," he added, "because I do not know how." They sat in silence again. This time it was shared. Then softly, "Do you think scent can forgive?" Hana looked up, her voice low. "I believe scent can reveal what we are afraid to name." He closed his eyes again, and this time his breath trembled. "I have kept too many things sealed," he said. "Too many names, too many nights." Hana did not move. She became the scent now, still permeating, present without touch. Finally he looked at her, not as lord to servant, not as man to woman, but as memory to mirror. "You have become what this house feared," he said. "Needed," she replied without pride. He nodded once. Then he gestured. She understood. Not a command to stay, but a permission to leave, to carry this memory away, to become its keeper, its witness, its final breath. She bowed deeply, lifted the box, and turned. When she slid the screen closed behind her, the corridor felt warmer. But she knew that warmth came not from fire. It came from the space left behind when something long buried had finally been spoken aloud. That night, she wrote a new entry in her scent ledger. Ash reborn. Salt remembered. Power folded into quiet hands. The scent of relinquishing. And beneath it she did not sign her name. She only pressed her palm lightly once into the page, then closed the book and blew out the lantern. The scent did the rest. The 21st day rose slowly, as if the sun itself were uncertain whether to appear. A veil of morning fog wrapped the compound in muted gray. Nothing sharp moved in the landscape. No birds, no servants rushing through corridors, no distant echoes of footsteps. Even the bells, which marked the hours, seemed to wait. Hana stood at her window in silence. The events of the previous day, the sealed scent, the words exchanged in the innermost chamber, still pressed against her like an imprint on wet paper. Faint, but unerasable. She had not dreamed. She had simply existed through the night, half waking, the scent of ash and fennel clinging faintly to her robe. There was no message from the Lord, no return summons, only the silence that followed a turning. She did not dress in formal robes today. She chose linen, soft and uncolored, and tied her hair with a single thread of brown. She wore no scent, not even the faintest trace of oil on her wrists. Today she would carry only herself. Sayo brought her a tray of tea but said little. Her eyes lingered on Hana longer than usual, As if she had sensed something invisible in the air, a quiet deepening that made speech feel inappropriate. "I will be in the sealed garden," Hana said. Sayo nodded. The walk to the sealed garden felt different this time. No longer hidden, no longer tentative, it welcomed her now, as though it had always been hers. The path was wet from dew, and the trees shimmered faintly with droplets, their branches heavy with the turning season. She sat once more on the stone bench beneath the maple tree. Its leaves were nearly gone. Only a few clung stubbornly to the highest branches, trembling in the gentle wind. She sat there for a long time. No scrolls, no brush, no incense. She simply breathed. It was then that Lady Sumi arrived. Not in her usual stately form, not wrapped in the heavy silks of her robe, but instead in a simple blue robe, her sleeves rolled just slightly to reveal the curve of her wrists. Her hair was pinned carelessly, a single lock falling loose near her temple. She did not bow, she sat. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Sumi said, "He has not spoken of you today." "I didn't expect him to," Hana replied. Sumi studied her face. "You've changed this house more than you know," she said. "Not through scandal, not with beauty or flirtation, but with stillness, with memory." Hana said nothing. "Women like you don't rise often," Sumi continued, "because most fear the cost of visibility." Hana turned to her, voice calm. "And what is the cost?" Sumi paused. "Loneliness," she said, "and reverence." The words settled like leaves. Then Sumi handed her something small, wrapped in paper, bound with a thread of black silk. "From Otsuki," she said. "She left it for you." Hana took it gently and unfolded the package. Inside was a single petal, dried, curled at the edges, deep violet in color. Beneath it, a slip of parchment with only 4 words written in the old style. "You are the flame." Hana held the petal in her palm. Its scent was faint, but she recognized it. Not from a blend, not from a recipe, from Otsuki herself. The old woman had always carried it beneath her sleeves, a signature known only to the truly attentive. And now it had been passed on, not as inheritance, but as naming. "I am leaving," Sumi said quietly. Hana looked at her, surprised. "The Southern Court has requested my service," she explained. "They believe my counsel can help them balance a house divided." Hana nodded slowly. "And do you wish to go?" she asked. "I wish to be useful," Sumi replied, "and I can no longer guide what you have already mastered." She stood, brushing the folds of her robe. "Do not become too humble," she added. "There is a time for softness, but also a time to be recognized." Hana rose with her. They bowed, 2 women who had seen too much, who had named things others tried to hide, who had carried silence like a crown and a chain. When Hana returned to her chamber, she placed the violet petal in her ledger, pressed it between the pages of her first blend. Then she wrote, "I was the scent in their silence. Now I am the silence they sent." That night, she did not light any incense. She left the room untouched. But when the wind blew through the half-open screen, carrying the faintest trace of pine and fennel into the corridor, the guards outside turned their heads, uncertain why the air felt heavier, and why they suddenly remembered a name they had not dared to speak aloud. And still, she did not speak it. Not yet. She simply closed her eyes and let them remember. The 22nd day rose beneath a sky veiled in pearl gray. There was no sun, only the faint glow of light diffused across the estate, as if the heavens had drawn a thin sheet over the day. It was the kind of morning that made even the sound of footsteps feel muffled, and the world seemed to exist in a softer key, muted, listening, inward. Hana sat alone at her writing table, her brush poised but unmoving. The violet petal from Otsuki remained pressed in her ledger, a memory tucked between fragrance and silence. She had not lit incense in 2 days. Her chamber, once the quiet heart of rising scents, now breathed only the scent of linen and pine, ink and wood. It felt clean, but also expectant, as if something had been paused, not ended. Sayo entered with a single item in her hands, a folded robe of midnight silk. It shimmered faintly, even in the low light, as though dyed from the hour before sleep. She laid it gently beside Hana and stepped back. "There will be a gathering," she said softly. "Tonight, in the Hall of Wind and Paper." Hana turned. "For what occasion?" Sayo hesitated. "No one has said, only that you are to attend, alone." Hana nodded. "And the others?" "No summons for them, only you." There was no fear in Sayo's voice, but something had settled in her eyes, like the edge of knowing. Hana reached forward and touched the robe. It was cool, smooth as water, but heavy in her hands. The threads that lined the inside were old. This was not a new garment, but one drawn from deep within the estate's ceremonial stores. It was a robe worn only when something was being marked. Not celebrated, not mourned, marked. She spent the day in preparation, but not with servants. She requested no assistance. She braided her own hair, polished her skin with cloth and cool water, steeped her hands in a basin of mountain salt and citrus peel. When evening fell, she dressed without perfume. Instead, she chose to wear the memory of scent, the trace of ash from her blends, the faintest ghost of fennel on her sleeves, and the natural oil of her skin, warmed by stillness. The Hall of Wind and Paper sat near the eastern wall of the compound. Few were permitted to enter. It was said the room had once been a retreat for a former mistress of the Takeda clan, a woman who had composed over 200 poems, all of which had vanished after her death. The screens in the hall were old, painted not with color but with ink, line after line of calligraphy from forgotten hands. The wind moved through the space with ease, stirring the paper walls so that it seemed the very words were breathing. She entered barefoot. The floor was warm, the lanterns dim. At the far end of the room, Lord Takeda stood alone, facing one of the inked panels. He did not turn when she entered. She approached with soft steps and bowed deeply. When she rose, he finally turned. He wore no crest, no ornament. His robe was unmarked, but the weight of his presence had changed. He looked tired, but not weary. There was something resolved in the way he stood, something relinquished. I asked them to leave the hall empty, he said. Tonight is not for them. Hana remained silent. I have lived in power for many years, he continued, and found that it often demands forgetting. He gestured toward the screen before him. The calligraphy there was old, blurred in places, but one line remained visible. The wind carries what the mouth cannot. I thought that meant words, he said, but now I wonder if it meant scent. She took a step forward. Or presence, she said quietly, the presence we leave behind. He turned to her fully now. I summoned you tonight not as a lord to a concubine, he said, but as a man to the one who gave me back my memory. I do not deserve worship, Hana replied. No, he said, but you deserve to be known. He lifted a small scroll from the table beside him and held it out. She received it with both hands. Inside, it was not a poem, not a decree. It was a name, her full name, written in the Lord's hand, sealed with the Takeda crest. To record you, he said, in the history of this house, not as scent, not as whisper, as self. Her throat tightened. Few concubines were ever named in the records, even fewer with their birth names. Most were reduced to titles, to symbols, to traces of silk and rumors. She bowed slowly, deeply, not in submission, but in gratitude. When she stood again, he was watching her as one does when faced with something quietly inevitable. There are those who will not understand this, he said. Those who will say I have elevated a servant above her station. She met his gaze. Let them speak, she said. Their words will fade, but scent, once left in the air, remains. He exhaled, long and low. The lanterns flickered. The paper screens rustled like leaves. Then softly, he said, when this house forgets itself again, remind it. And with that, he stepped aside. She turned, scroll still in her hand, and walked slowly down the length of the hall. Each step a quiet declaration, each breath a line unwritten. By the time she reached the doors, she had become more than fragrance. She was memory given form, and even the wind, as it passed her, seemed to carry her name. The 23rd day arrived with frost. It clung to the edges of roof tiles and the veins of fallen leaves. The stone paths glistened in the pale morning, each step a quiet crackle beneath sandal soles. Winter had finally arrived, not with snow, but with breath visible in the air and a stillness that felt final. Hana stood beneath the eaves of her chamber, wrapped in a thick robe of gray wool, her hands cupped around a bowl of hot tea. She watched the steam rise, curl, then vanish, each wisp like a fleeting thought. Behind her, the sealed scroll bearing her name rested atop the writing table, unbroken since last night. She had not opened it again. She didn't need to. Her name had already left its mark on the house. It was in the way servants glanced at her with a mix of awe and uncertainty, in the way doors were opened before she arrived, in the way Lady Fuji bowed slightly lower than before, not as concession, but as recognition. Sayo entered quietly with a package wrapped in dark silk. It was left at the foot of your door, she said. No sender. Hana nodded and took it, untying the knot with slow fingers. Inside was a single object, a comb, but not the sandalwood one the Lord had given her long ago. This one was older, crafted of bone, the ivory aged and worn. Its teeth were uneven, and on its spine, etched so faintly it was almost invisible, was a single word, Amayo, rain at night. Hana stared at it for a long time. She knew the name. It was not hers. It was the name of the concubine who had left the compound 5 winters before, disappearing without explanation. Her name struck from the records. Rumors had whispered of exile, of scandal. Some said she had fled, others that she had been erased, but the truth had never surfaced. And now, a message from her. Rain at night. A memory sent through ivory, through time. What will you do? Sayo asked. Hana held the comb gently. I will answer her. She moved to her writing table and unrolled a sheet of parchment, the fibers soft and textured beneath her palm. She wrote not with formality, not with title, but with essence. To the one who left no scent behind, I remember the hollow spaces. I have seen the gaps in the records. You are not forgotten. You are the shadow in the perfume, the echo in the hush of the Lord's chamber. The space I now feel was once yours. I walk it with open eyes. She folded the letter, placed it into a silken pouch, and handed it to Sayo. Find the courier who travels to the southern hills, she said. No name, no question, just this. Sayo bowed, then left. The day passed without summons, without ritual. Hana spent the hours in the scent chamber, not blending, not preparing. She was archiving. She opened her ledgers, copying her own recipes into fresh scrolls with her name affixed clearly at the top of each one. She added notes beside them. Why each blend had been made, who it had touched, which emotion it was meant to recall. She was writing not for preservation, but for proof. A woman's scent in the world of power was often remembered, but her hand, the one that crafted it, was not. That would no longer be true here. By twilight, the brazier had been lit and a bowl of incense burned softly in the corner of the chamber. She had chosen a blend of her own making, bitter orange peel, dried rose stem, and powdered silk thread. The scent was warm and dry, like a letter read aloud before being burned. She sat by the window, watching frost reclaim the edges of the pond. And then softly, the door slid open. Lady Akiko stood there. She did not enter. She only looked at Hana, her expression unreadable, eyes shadowed beneath a heavy fringe. Then she said, You've done what none of us did. Hana turned. What is that? You didn't disappear. They held each other's gaze. I won't, Hana said. Akiko nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then she turned and vanished into the corridor. Night came fully. Lanterns were lit across the estate. The house seemed quieter now, not with fear, not with suspicion, but with reverence, the kind that follows the rise of something new, something that cannot yet be named. And in her chamber, Hana placed the bone comb on the windowsill, letting the night wind carry its story forward. Tomorrow, there would be ceremony, a public naming, a role made official. But tonight, she simply breathed in the scent of frost and let her memory become the air. The 24th day dawned with no wind, no fog, no frost, only light. Soft and gold, it poured through the shoji screens like water across paper. The entire compound seemed bathed in it. The trees stood still. The garden pond reflected the sky perfectly, unbroken. Even the koi, usually swirling beneath the surface, rested in place as if paying attention. It was the kind of day that came only once in a season, or once in a lifetime. Sayo entered with a quiet reverence, her hands folded in front of her. There was no tray today, no robe in her arms. She simply bowed. They are ready, she said. Hana nodded. She had risen hours earlier, not in nervousness, but in intention. Her robe today was not selected by servants, nor drawn from the ceremonial shelves. She had made it ready herself, a simple flowing garment of ink-black silk, bound at the waist with a cord of white. No patterns, no embellishments, only the contrast of shadow and purity. She did not wear scent. Her presence was enough. As she stepped out of her chamber, the entire corridor was empty. Not because no one was watching, but because every footstep, every breath, every flicker of motion had drawn aside to allow her to pass. Wordlessly, she was led to the central hall, the Hall of Echoes, used only for transitions of power, for names that were to be written in ink that would not fade. The room was vast, with high-beamed ceilings and scrolls lining each wall. records of lineage, of marriages, of wars and treaties and oaths. A single brazier burned at the center of the space, and around it sat the highest voices of the house. Lady Fuji, Lady Akiko, the household steward, the archive master, the eldest concubine draped in silver brocade. And beside them, quiet, composed, was Lord Takeda. He did not rise when she entered. He only gestured to the space beside him. She walked across the tatami in measured steps, her hands folded, her gaze steady. She knelt just beyond the circle of smoke. Then Lord Takeda spoke. "Hana of the Yamabuki line," he said, his voice echoing through the quiet. "You have served this house not with obedience, but with awareness. You have spoken without raising your voice. You have remembered what others chose to forget." He paused. "You have made silence visible, and because of that, you will be recorded." A servant stepped forward with a scroll, an empty one. Upon it, the calligrapher wrote her name, not beneath a title, beside one, keeper of fragrance and memory. The ink dried in silence. Then Lord Takeda looked to her once more. "Do you accept what cannot be unseen? I do. Do you accept the burden of presence? I do. Then rise." And she did. For the first time, not as concubine, not as servant, not as shadow, but as herself. The scroll was sealed and placed into the wall's archive, the door to it shut with a low final sound. Not an ending, but a preservation. Afterward, she did not return to her chamber. She walked instead to the scent chamber, now hers without question. She lit no incense, she wrote no formula, she sat. And in that stillness, in that golden hush, she heard it, the breath of the house itself, alive, alert, listening for her. She reached for her ledger, opened to a fresh page, and began to write. This is the story of a woman once named only in whispers, who became the voice behind closed doors, the air within each silence, the echo in the fragrance they could no longer forget. She closed the book, rose, and stepped out into the sun, not to vanish, but to remain, a scent, a shadow, a story now written into the air.